Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathalie Carrasco. I'm a professor in France at the University of Paris-Saclay. And with my group, we work on the chemistry occurring in upper planetary atmospheres for about a decade. And I hope to show you how this chemistry specific is important for astrobiology. And to begin this story, all began, for my group at least, with Titan. This object is the largest moon of Saturn. And what makes Titan special is that among all the moons in the solar system, is the fact that Titan hosts a dense atmosphere. All the other moons are icy objects without any atmosphere. But on Titan, there is an atmosphere which is dense, which means that it has a high pressure, actually. At the surface of Titan, the pressure is very similar to the one we observe on Earth. And this atmosphere is made of molecular nitrogen and methane. So the pressure is similar to the one we observe on Earth, and the composition is quite close too, because you see that one of the main components is molecular nitrogen, like on Earth. So Titan is really a specific object in the solar system to investigate how the chemistry, atmospheric chemistry occurs and how it informs us about what could have occurred on the early Earth in the past before the emergence of life. And what we observe here on this picture, you see that Titan is seen as an orange, has a hazy orange appearance, and this is explained by the presence of a permanent haze surrounding Titan. And this haze is actually produced by photochemistry from the photochemistry of nitrogen and methane. This haze that surrounds Titan, due to its formation from nitrogen and methane, is therefore 100% organic. We don't know exactly what it is made of, but we know that it's made of complex macromolecules that will involve carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen, so with a high potential for prebiotic, for building prebiotic building blocks. So of course, it's a very important point to investigate prebiotic chemistry. And why are we very, very importantly, why did we study this subject so intensively for a decade? It's because of the Cassini space mission. It arrived around Titan in 2004. And the mission lasts 13 years. So during 13 years, the Cassini orbiter orbited Saturn and regularly passed very close to Titan and was able to very closely study and investigate the atmosphere and the surface of Titan. So we have 13 years of data to enable to understand this complex object. And one of the very important results that we obtained with this space mission is coming from the fact that this orbiter, Cassini, was able to close by Titan, but also to penetrate into the atmosphere of Titan. You see here symbolized a trajectory of Cassini into Titan atmosphere, and it was able to penetrate until 1,000 kilometers of altitudes. So the altitude is very highly developed at more than 1,000 kilometers. But at 1,000 kilometers, we have in situ measurements of the Cassini space mission, which provides an in situ information on the chemical composition of these upper atmospheric layers. What makes these upper atmospheric layers special compared to the lower, more dense atmospheric layers? At this altitude, high altitude, actually the molecule composing the atmosphere are subjected are submitted to the harsh radiation of the sun, involving also extreme ultraviolet radiation. And these radiation are able to photoionize the molecule composing the atmosphere, so that it is able to attract and to dissociate and ionize the species, so that you observed ion in the atmosphere. Positive ion, you see here a few examples, CH5+, NH4+, or HNH+, the most abundant one in Titan atmosphere. But also, because the charge balance is always neutral, you have also negatively charged species that are observed in Titan ionosphere, this upper atmospheric layer. You have electrons and you have negative ions. So the sum is neutral, but we observe positive ions and negative ions and electrons in Titan upper atmosphere. And the Cassini space mission gave us direct measurement, in situ measurements of this ion content. And the mission provided us some high surprise, very surprising results. We expected ions. We predicted that nitrogen and methane would be partially photoionized, but we didn't expect such an efficient chemical growth through ion. You observe here a mass spectrum of the ions composing Titan ionosphere measured by a mass spectrometer on board Cassini. And we expect to see these three first mass blocks, C1, C2, C4, C3, sorry. It means that the 1, 2, 3 here mean that in these blocks, the positive ions contained in these blocks contain a certain number of heavy ions, which is carbon or nitrogen. So here, 1 heavy atoms, 2 heavy atoms, 3 heavy atoms. So we expected these first mass blocks, but we didn't expect these higher mass blocks at C4, C5, C6, C7. So you see here, the intensity are still very important. Here, the y-axis is in log scale. So here, compared to HNH+, which is the most abundant one, you see that still at 10% in the C3 block, you still have some abundant densities. At C42, and you see that it decreases quite rapidly, but still it is 10 to the minus 3 abundance for this C7 mass block compared to the most abundant one. So you see here that we didn't expect, and we observe, we are able, thanks to Cassini, to reveal a very efficient chemical growth in Titan upper atmosphere through the ion. And this was unexpected, so this has to be investigated to be understood. And if you look at the negative data collected by the mass analyzer on board Cassini, here the surprise is even more important. So it is again a mass spectrum. So here in x-axis you see the mass increasing, and in y-axis you see the density of the negative ions measured. The resolution is very bad because it wasn't made. This instrument wasn't made to really reveal, and we didn't expect such large species. So it wasn't a good mass spectrum, but it was made to analyze the energy of the ion that could escape. And here we didn't expect such measurements. You see that for the negative ions, some very heavy negative ions were measured, were highlighted, and you see that it is up to 10,000 mass units. So it's really huge macromolecules, and it is so huge that actually it cannot be in the gas phase anymore. So actually the transition is somewhere here between 200, 300 mass units. We don't know exactly, but here there is a transition, and actually it's not gas phase negative ion that we observe here, but it is actually some solid nanoparticles, the really first grain composing the haze of Titan that is actually produced since this upper atmospheric layer in Titan upper atmosphere. So those are nanoparticles, and they are revealed in negative mode because they attach electrons, so they appear as negatively charged, and they are revealed by the mass analyzer. So this was actually a surprise because we knew that there was some haze around surrounding Titan, but we expected that this was produced in the dense atmospheric layer close to the surface, and not here at so high altitudes in this diluted upper atmosphere that composed here the upper atmosphere of Titan. So an efficient ion growth and even the formation of the first nanoparticles in this diluted ion. Diluted layer. So we have here the observation, an expected large organic species detected in the thermosphere, which is surprising because it is a very diluted atmospheric layer. What makes the thermosphere special to begin to understand why this this chemical growth occurs so efficiently? We have some clues about that. Actually, if you observe the reactivity of methane and nitrogen, you have on this plot here in blue the solar spectrum, and you recognize here the line of Lyman alpha in the solar spectrum. So you see that here the concentration, the density of the photons in the extreme UV decrease rapidly, but there is still some. And these photons are very important at wavelengths lower than 100 nanometer, because these photons are the only ones that are able to dissociate and ionize nitrogen. You see here in green the photo absorption cross section of nitrogen, and you see that it begins to be dissociated and photoionized only with photons with energies lower, with wavelengths lower than 100 nanometers. For methane, you see that it's a little easier to photodissociate methane. It begins at 140 nanometer. You see here that it will be very sensitive to the Lyman alpha radiation, of course, and it is still very efficiently photodissociated and photoionized with wavelengths here below 100 nanometer. So you see here that something important occurs only with photons with very hard extreme UV wavelengths. And if you convolve this photodissociation absorption cross-section of nitrogen and methane, according to how the atmosphere of Titan will absorb this radiation, you have here a plot of the optical depths in Titan's atmosphere. It means that how the different photons, according to their wavelengths, are absorbed at different altitudes due to this absorption by nitrogen, methane, and then the C2, the C2 abundant component at lower altitudes. And you see here that after that below 1,000 kilometers, there is no extreme UV photon anymore. So below this altitude, nitrogen here in this area, below 1,000 kilometers, nitrogen is inert. It is only reactive above 1,000 kilometers, because here there is still a few photons with this harsh extreme UV radiation. And of course, at this altitude, methane is also photodissociated and photoionized. So at this altitude, actually, in the upper atmosphere, it is the only location in Titan atmosphere where you can observe a direct coupling of the reactivity between molecular nitrogen and methane. So this is what makes the upper atmosphere special. But it doesn't explain what I tell you. It's just the beginning of the story. It doesn't explain what will be precisely the processes that are able to explain the large ion we have observed. So we have to think and work on the different processes. But also, we have also to understand and investigate the chemical composition of the nanoparticle, the haze that is produced at this altitude, and which already provides some complex possible prebiotic building blocks since very high altitudes in the atmosphere. And also, the third question that I want to share and investigate with you is also how Titan informs us about the chemistry, the activities that occur in upper atmospheric layers for other bodies than Titan. So first, the processes. You have here a plot of what is up to now well known for the chemical growth in Titan. So you see here a network with a haze in the center, methane on the left and nitrogen on the right. But you see that here it seems to be already complex and to explain a lot of things, but you don't see any iron in this plot. It is what because of what we discussed before. It is because what has been investigated in depth up to now, before the Cassini space mission, was mainly the neutral reactivity and not the ion reactivity. This ion reactivity had been neglected, simply neglected, because it wasn't supposed. We didn't expect that it was so efficient. So you see that it's already complex, but there is no ion reaction in this network. So of course, it is what we wanted to complete. We wanted to participate to understand more completely this chemical growth occurring on Titan in the upper atmosphere. So involving the ion chemistry. So to investigate this chemistry with other groups in the world, other colleagues and other groups, we developed specific laboratory experiments to investigate this specific extreme UV chemistry occurring in Titan upper atmosphere. So it requires, it wasn't easy. This is why also it hasn't been made before. It isn't easy because it requires, again, to dissociate, to activate nitrogen, which is a very high inert molecule. So we have to provide some photons with wavelengths lower than 100 nanometer. And if you want to buy an extreme UV lamp, it will be coupled with a window. And all the windows that are developed have a transparency limit that cannot be lower than 115 nanometers. It is the best windows which are developed. And of course, it will stop the photon that are of interest for us to be able to dissociate and activate nitrogen. So this is a strong limitation. We cannot use ready extreme UV lamp because of this transparency limit of the windows. We have to develop some coupling between the extreme UV source and the photoreactor without any windows. And this involves some difficulties. There is a group here in the US that developed a first experiment, Imanaka and Smith, that was coupled on the Berkeley synchrotron instrument. And they developed also a photoreactor that was coupled to the synchrotron radiation thanks to a complex and quite a nice pumping differential system to be able to couple low vacuum radiation to this photochemical reactor. This was a really first experiment of this kind in the community, and the diagnosis to study the chemistry, unfortunately, wasn't able to detect and identify the ions. It was only a mass spectrometer enabling to probe the neutral content in this photoreactor. There was no direct insight on the ion content occurring in this system. But they obtained some really nice results. You see here the 4 different observations they made. Here, the first spectrum here on the bottom is the reference without any radiation, so the extreme UV source off. So you see methane here and nitrogen here. At Lyman alpha, you begin to observe the formation of a few compounds at higher masses. If the energy increases a little, if the wavelength decreases, here at 85 nanometer, you begin to be able to dissociate nitrogen, but not ionize it. It's only dissociate. It produces N plus N from N2. In this case, you see that maybe there is a little more chemical growth that is observed. But their main result is really when they go above the ionization threshold for N2, producing N2 plus ion. In this case, they observe a very efficient chemical growth. So they really reveal how the chemical growth, so the methane ion chemistry, will be boosted thanks to N2 plus ion. And they provide a reason here. It's they propose here that it's mainly carbon-containing molecules, carbon-containing species, but which have been produced thanks to an activated chemistry of methane, thanks to a charge transfer reaction N2+, that transfer it charges to methane, and that boosted then the chemistry of methane thanks to this first charge transfer reaction. So this was the first result. A second group here developed another experiment, also coupled to another synchrotron beamline in Italy. And in this case, it was the first experiment that was able here to have a direct diagnosis on the ion. It was the first direct insight on the ions in this system. Again, extreme UV irradiation of the system, and they observed the first ion. The difficulty is that their cells, their photoreactor was very, very small. And in this case, they unfortunately had a lot of wall effects observed in this very small cell. However, they observed here the first main ion. You see HCNH plus and C2H5 plus for this irradiation of Titan upper atmospheric condition. But you see here this contamination with water due to this, to the size, the very small size of the cell. But also they were slightly disappointed because they didn't observe a lot of growth. You don't see any large ion in this case. Again, it's a limitation due to the experiment. It's hard to simulate the long time, the long interaction between the ions and the neutrals that occurs in Titan upper atmosphere in a small cell that is under vacuum. Actually, in this case, the first ions that are produced, they are rapidly evacuated from the cell due to the pumping, the very low pressure. And so in this case, they don't stay long enough to be able to react themselves with other neutrals and produce some larger ions as it is observed in Titan upper atmosphere. So there is this difficulty to be able to form these ions, but to let them stay long enough to be able to react and to form the other ions. So the first very interesting first experiment, but with a limitation due to this different element that we discussed. So in my group, we developed another experiment that came in complementarity to this two first one. In this case, we developed a photoreactor that was also able to be coupled to a synchrotron radiation. But what we made is that we also developed an extreme UV source in the lab that is that does not enable, is not tunable as a synchrotron radiation. We don't have any wavelengths we want, but we can make any experiment we want because it is a lab source in our lab, so we can repeat the experiment as many times as we want, which is not the case on the large instruments like synchrotron, where you ask for beam time and you obtain a few days every year, but you cannot repeat and do as many experiments as you want. So we developed this experiment here, and we are able, depending on the rare gases that is used in our extreme UV source, we are able to produce some photons in the extreme spectral range at different wavelengths. And in particular here, we like a lot this condition that enable to produce some photons at about 74 nanometers, which is able to photoionize nitrogen and also partially photodissociate nitrogen. So it's an interesting wavelength for what we want to investigate then. And in this case, we have a large reactor cell compared to the previous experiment that was presented. So it largely strongly limits the Wall effects. And in this case, we are also able to cover a large pressure range, which will enable to also change the residence time of the gas and be able to also produce some larger ions compared to the previous experiments. So this is what we obtained recently. It is a paper that has been really recently published in 2022. You see a mass spectrometer here with the gray box for the first C3 blocks. There is also ions at larger masses, but I want to focus already here on this first C3 blocks. So in gray it is the experimental data, and in blue it is the best model we are able to do to simulate, to mimic the experimental results. So you see here that it's quite consistent. It's it's in good agreement for the first two blocks. There is a good agreement for the main ion in the C2 block here, N2 plus, C2H4 plus, C2H5 plus. Okay, fine. But you see that since the C3 block, we had some surprise. We thought that chemistry was at least well predicted until the first C3 block. Actually, here our results show that even in the C3 block, there is some little problems. Why do I say that? If you look in detail here, you see that the main experimental ions that have been observed are at mass 42 and mass 43. And you see that the main ions that are predicted are actually at lower masses, here at mass 41 and mass 39. So the main ions predicted by the model are actually totally different from the one we observe. So we know that we have a problem here. And the question is now to understand what are these ions, the one we observe, what they are exactly, and of course, how to explain their formation. So to investigate this question, first we had to identify clearly what were these ions. So we made some experiments that were able to really properly, univocally, unambiguously, identify what were these ions, and we used isotopic labeling for that. I will go quite rapidly. For example, you see here the main ion observed before at mass 43. You see that if the methane is not regular methane with a carbon with mass 12, but a carbon which is labeled with the 13 isotopes, mass 13 here. In this case, you see that if you observe the shift of +1, it means that in this ion, there is actually one carbon. It is what we observe here. So in this C3 ion, it seems that there is only one carbon because the shift is only +1 in this case. We were very surprised. So we made some complementary experiment, this time with nitrogen labeling. So instead of using regular nitrogen at mass 14, we used the Haze isotope 1 at mass 15. And you see indeed that in this case, the shift is +2. So it means that these ions actually contain 2 nitrogen. So it was actually very surprising because this ion, if you compare the ratio between the carbon and nitrogen, you see that for this C3 positive ion, you have only 1 carbon and 2 nitrogen. So you have more nitrogen than carbon. We expect that nitrogen could help the organic growth, but actually in this case, it's even more than the number of carbon in the organic molecule. So nitrogen rich, we can say. And also, interestingly, you see that nitrogen seems to be directly incorporated. You remember at the wavelengths used here, nitrogen is under the radiation of our extreme UV source. It is transformed. It is photoionized and produced N2+. So it seems that here N2+ is directly incorporated in the carbon chain to produce what we call here some diazo ion because of this number of two nitrogen atoms in the ions. So it's not only one diazo ion that has been revealed, but actually we made the same exercise on this ion at mass 42, and it is also a diazo ion that has been revealed. These ions were not in the models at all. It wasn't expected at all. So now that it has been well identified and it is the most abundant ion in our experiment, we have therefore to explain their formation. So to find the pathways, the chemical pathway to explain their formation. So we had to guess. This is difficult because when you don't know, it's a new reaction. It wasn't expected. You have to imagine what could be the process and test. So we made some hypotheses. We expected that nitrogen, as was told before, we expected that at this wavelength, nitrogen is transformed in N2+. So we suspect that the reaction we are looking for involves N2+ ion. And for the carbon-containing initial molecule, we could expect that it directly reacts with methane, N2+ plus methane. Unfortunately, this reaction is well known, has been well studied, and it doesn't explain any formation of diazo ion. So it cannot be this one. So we have to find another abundant neutral containing carbon, and actually the second most abundant neutral carbon containing species in our experiment is actually CH3, which is produced by the reaction between CH4+, the ion produced from photoionization of methane, plus methane itself. It produced a lot of CH3 radicals in the reaction, CH3 neutral molecule in the reaction. In this case, we suspected that it could come from this reaction, which hasn't been studied actually. There is not N2+ plus CH3 that is described in any database, and this is understandable due to the fact that it's a reaction between an ion and a radical. CH3 is not a stable neutral, so this reaction is actually not so easy to study, so it hasn't been studied yet. So how can we progress to see if this guess is actually the good one, if this reaction is feasible? We contacted a theoretician among our colleagues, and they made the calculation of this reaction. And they show, you see here the reactant, N2+ plus CH3, and they show actually that this reaction was totally feasible. There is no barrier, and it could explain the formation of the two diazo ion that we observed in our reaction. So good point, it's feasible, it's possible. And we estimated the rate constant and how many among the two diazo ions could be produced. And we were able to make some prediction for Titan thermospheric condition. So to go further, we need some better calculation, but here we have a first rough estimation. And we are able to predict that these two ions are actually abundant, with abundancy between 10 to the -2 and 10 to the -4 compared to the most abundant ion in Titan ionosphere. So actually, we were able, thanks to the experiment, to reveal new ion, very rich in nitrogen, with abundant concentration in Titan upper atmosphere, and enabling to explain a very efficient incorporation of nitrogen in carbon chain. So this was really a nice result that we obtained recently. But we made a lot of other study, and I will not go in such details for the other study. I will show you these results more rapidly. Here we were also interested in studying different wavelengths, because of course in the solar spectrum there is not only this photoionization pathways from nitrogen that could be interesting. We also investigated a wavelength where methane is only dissociated, no ion in this case from a nitrogen, and methane is actually really photoionized. And we investigated how the chemical growth occur and how it could explain the large ions detected in the Cassini mass spectra that you saw before. And actually, this study was a strong confirmation of the formation that was observed in Titan ionosphere of a large aromatic molecule, here benzene and possibly toluene. In blue, it's our experimental results, and in red, it is the mass spectrum observed by Cassini for the neutral molecule. You see here that our experiment simulates very nicely the formation of benzene. And what is specific and what wasn't in the chemical network up to now is the role of these ions, because the only description that in the model up to now was able to simulate benzene was only neutral pathways. Here we provide a strong confirmation of the role of the ions for the chemical growth. I told you that we were also going to discuss a little the chemical composition of the aerosols in Titan. Thanks to our lab experiment, we were also able to provide some clues about this complex content in these nanoparticles in the haze. First, here are the few information we got from the direct in situ measurements by the Huygens probe that was on board Cassini. Cassini launched this probe that made one descent in Titan atmosphere, and there was a pyrolyzer on this probe that was able to analyze the chemical composition of the haze. Actually, the experiment didn't went perfectly, but it provided us some rough approximation of the chemical composition of the haze. You have here results. The pyrolysis of the haze leads to the formation of a strong signature of HCN, ammonia, and C2H2. So it's a pyrolysis, so it's an indirect information of the real complexity of the chemical composition of the haze, but it informed us in the way that it informed us that this haze contained a lot of nitrogen first, and because you have this strong signature in HCN and ammonia. And that's all. We cannot predict a lot more from this. So to go further, we developed again some experiments in the lab to be able to simulate, to synthesize analogs of the haze in Titan upper atmosphere. And after collection of this haze, we made some high performance analysis that enabled to give us some much more information on the chemical composition of this complex nanoparticle. And one study I want to share with you is this one. A lot of analyses are made on the soluble fraction of the haze. Why? Here you have the haze that has been produced in the experiment and collected, and often a lot of analytical devices are made to be coupled with a soluble content. You need to introduce your sample in a liquid phase. So we have to work with a fractionation step here, and a lot of literature has been made on the composition of this soluble fraction from the haze. And we were interested in the group into investigating how this soluble fraction was actually representative of the whole material. What was the approximation we made by approximating the haze with its only soluble fraction? So we made an analysis with a high performance mass spectrometer, where the both soluble and insoluble fraction can be ionized and introduced with the name of this ionization system is laser desorption ionization, LDI. And thanks to LDI ionization, we are able to both ionize the soluble and the insoluble fraction and compare. And this is what we obtained. You see here in blue the the molecule composing the haze in the insoluble fraction, and in red in the soluble fraction. And so here in y-axis, it is the mass. So you begin in small mass, and you see here an increase. And it is also plotted according to the chemical composition. So the N2C ratio and the H2C ratio. So the number of hydrogen compared to the number of carbon in each molecule. And here the number of nitrogen compared to the number of carbon for each molecule. And you see that actually the N2C ratio is rather similar between the two distributions. But if you see here on the H2C axis, you see that actually there is a strong shift between the two. So it means that the soluble fraction is actually quite different from the insoluble fraction. And the difference is really explained by this H2C ratio. The soluble fraction is more hydrogen rich. So it means that the insoluble fraction is much more unsaturated and actually is much more aromatic. So this was an important result, and we were also able to identify the chemical composition of this grain, of each particle, and this was an important result. So actually, we cannot approximate the sample with the soluble fraction. It's very important to be able to really analyze the whole sample because there is some strong difference. And we went a little further recently, last year. We worked with a group in Switzerland that developed atomic force microscopy technique. So in this case, we were able to analyze the insoluble fraction. We were able to extract a few molecules composing this haze. And this molecule were possibly studied really independently, molecule per molecule. And you see here a snapshot, like a snapshot of one molecule composing this complex material. So here, what you see here, it's actually at angstrom scale. It's the tenth of nanometer. It's really each dot here, it's an atom. So you have really the chemical structure of the molecule under your eyes, naked eyes. And here by modeling, because of the resolution, it needs some strong data treatment methods, but we were able to identify the structure here. So you see that it confirms the aromatic structure of these molecules. And also, it's in development, but actually the contrast is not the same if the atom is a nitrogen or a carbon. So we are also able to identify that nitrogen was also here in the chain of this skeleton composing the molecule. So we have the confirmation that the insoluble fraction is actually composed by nitrogen-containing polyaromatic hydrocarbon structure. So here it's one example, but we had also other molecules that were identified and were all consistent with this kind of structure. So you have nitrogen-rich PAH structures composing this haze. And our experiment also helped, this lab experiment also helped to prepare the future mission, because of course, the Cassini space mission is now finished. It provided a lots of data and information, but it also opened a lot of questions. So a mission is in preparation, the Dragonfly mission. And we are working in the lab with our analogs and with this high performance analytical method, to be able to improve our knowledge. And when we will come back to Titan, we will be able to better investigate in situ the chemical composition of the haze. In this case, we participate to the development of an instrument that will that is prepared for space condition, and that involves high resolution mass spectrometry analysis, as I showed you before, but this time it will be for space investigation. And my last point I told you that we were also interested now in knowing how this upper atmospheric chemistry that we have investigated on Titan due to the Cassini space mission, how this information, how this knowledge can be now extracted and help us to investigate other bodies. Of course, one that we are very interested in my group is, so I told you that the Titan was the best analogs we have in the solar system to investigate the atmosphere of the early Earth. There are other analogs, extremely good analogs of early Earth that will be actually observable in the very near future, thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope, but also the ARIEL Space Telescope, which will be the investigation of the super Earths that are detected presently. We will have the first measurement on their atmosphere soon. And so, of course, we want to contribute with my group to this understanding of the upper atmosphere in those conditions for these new objects. And we have begun a little. For example, here, a first study that we have made last year in 2021, we have begun to see how Titan could be slightly changed to investigate scenarios that could be like a Titan inhabitable zone, so the condition of Titan, but with humidity, with water vapor. What would be the result? And here again, you see in red mass spectrum of the ion in our experiments. And you see that there is some really some novelty. You see here that there is a direct coupling. Even if water has been introduced in a very low amount, it's only 10 to the minus 4 compared to nitrogen and methane, so it's a low amount. But it is actually very reactive, and you see that the incorporation of the organic matter is very efficient, and we observe a lot of oxidized molecules, so it's very interesting to investigate in the future. And another point, and it will be my last example that I wanted to share today, is how this upper atmospheric chemistry can also help us to provide some new probes for the observation to come by the James Webb Space Telescope and ARIEL, how ions could be possibly detected by these telescopes and inform us on the chemical content of the atmosphere. And in particular, it is very important to look for some new probes, because it seems, from what we know on a larger exoplanet that have been already observed and on which we have already some data on the chemical composition on the atmosphere, it seems that condensed material is often present. So it means hazes, or it means clouds, or it means lots of condensing nature that prevents a clear identification of the chemical gas phase contribution. So sometimes in the presence of clouds, lots of clouds, it's very difficult to obtain some clear signature of the chemical content composing the atmosphere. So in this case, the ions actually would be above the cloud deck. So if it is observable, it would provide some interesting signature of the chemical composition of the atmosphere, in particular if you cannot observe the chemical composition due to this important cloud deck. So we wanted to investigate this idea. We made a first case scenario where we change the H2 amount. So we compared atmospheres with a large, which are dominated by hydrogen, and other where hydrogen will be in a very low amount. So to simulate rocky exoplanet compared to mini Neptune's exoplanets. And we observed the major ions that were produced in this condition. Experimentally, we observed that the two major ions are actually H3O+ and H3+. And then we worked with colleagues that are able to retrieve, to predict what could be observed with the performance of the James Webb Space Telescope and the ARIEL telescope. So they took our experimental data and they simulate what could be observed. And actually, they found that the signal to noise ratio was actually favorable, and that these two ions could be observed with the performances of the James Webb and the ARIEL instruments. So if they are there, they could be observed. And actually, there is a last result that is quite interesting in this case. In H2 poor atmosphere, so volatile rich super Earth, or no, volatile rich, sorry, it means that it's H2 rich, and rocky super Earth, it is H2 poor. In this case, so you have two extreme scenarios. In both cases, we observe large amount of H3O plus ion, but H3 plus is only observed in the case of an H2 rich atmosphere. It's not observed in the case of a rocky super Earth atmosphere. So you see here that we can provide a probe to distinguish between these two atmospheres. So this could be very interesting to be able to decipher between these two kind of atmosphere that we expect to observe soon with the James Webb and later with the ARIEL telescope. So to conclude, I hope to have shown you how this upper planetary atmosphere could inform us on an efficient chemistry that has been largely investigated on Titan, but which also open new perspectives for exoplanets. And I just summary a little the main result that we obtained in the case in particular of Titan. It is very important for primitive chemistry because actually it directly activates the chemistry of nitrogen, which is in other cases very inert. We saw also that it was very efficient to trigger a very efficient chemical growth, and also to couple this chemical growth with nitrogen and leads to an incorporation of nitrogen in the carbon chain. So it's very important for astrobiology. And last but not least, we also expect through upper planetary atmosphere and these ion signatures to be able to provide detectable ion signatures for the next characterization of the atmosphere of super Earth exoplanets soon by the James Webb Space Telescope in particular in the next summer. Thank you very much.
May I ask a question?
Yes,
so that's a great talk. Thank you so much, Nathalie. This will be sort of very general one, and I mean, it's maybe more to the future, but I mean, when you were presenting the case of the Titan and this passage of Cassini there. So how stable the situation is which Cassini observed? So how long-lived are those molecules, those ions? Are they recombining quickly? Are the situation, I mean, is it just local measurement, or it lasts for a long time that, I mean, one can have more idea about the state of the upper atmosphere, or it's just so it's very on the short time scales? How it goes?
If I understand your question, you are wondering about the lifetime of the ions, if it's possible to measure them before they disappear. Is
yes.
it what you? Yeah. Actually, their lifetime is short compared to neutral molecules, but they are instantaneously identified by the mass spectrometer. This is why we observed in situ their formation. But actually, they have a short lifetime, but they also form rapidly. So they form rapidly and disappear rapidly. So finally, their concentration, their average concentration, is not so low because of this efficient formation. And finally, the concentration in Titan upper atmosphere is 10 to the minus 6. It's the ppm, the ions. So it's not so low concentration due to this efficiency of their formation. So you have an average concentration, even if they don't last long. You have always a stable average concentration that can be observed. And actually, I know that colleagues of mine have proposed some observation to the ALMA telescope to be able to detect the diazo ion, for example, in Titan atmosphere. I'm not sure that it has been selected, but they show in their proposal that it was feasible. Actually, we could observe this diazo ion in Titan atmosphere due to this concentration that is rather high finally.
Thank you, Nathalie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Hi, I'm Julian Penzinger. I might have a quick question. I'm currently a master's student at Leiden University and also doing some lab work with chemistry. And a question what was really interesting for me, or because I'm currently studying a bit the chemistry of Enceladus, is that you actually need quite extreme ultraviolet radiation to ionize N2, and even though Titan and Enceladus is pretty far away, how long are the timescales there, or how like the problem I think is that it's really only a few photons, which such high energies actually come from the sun. So how long does this actually go with timescales? I think that's not quite fast as well with N2 plus chemistry, is it?
Again, I'm not sure to get the question. It's again on the lifetime of the ion, or it's more on the efficiency due to the low amount of photons with this kind of energy that are able to ionize nitrogen.
Yes, kind of. So would it quite change a lot if also with other stars, since you also investigated other stars in the sun?
I get it.
Really,
I get your question.
Sorry for the getting the question confused, because I think the sun really cuts off really sharply and does only leave very few extreme ultraviolet photons.
Yeah, true. Actually, for example, for the early sun, the young sun, actually the extreme UV contribution was probably higher. So what we observe now was probably more efficient in the past, and it is also the case for the star, for example, the dwarfs, brown and red dwarfs that are in the system that we are very interested in. For example, for the super Earth, they have been detected around dwarf stars. And in this case, this kind of stars, small stars, have actually also a higher extreme UV contribution. So what we observe on Titan would also be stronger, be even more efficient in the for the super Earth we want to investigate in the future. So actually, well, it's true. It's in the solar spectrum, it decreases rapidly, but it's still, we see on Titan that it's very important. And it could be even more important in the past on the early Earth, and also on this super Earth exoplanet we want to investigate.
Okay. Well, thank you.